Got it. All right. Kick
All
it off,
right.
Mr. Bernstein.
It's the November 20th Tinderbox Meetup. I'm Mark Bernstein, the developer of Tinderbox, and here is Michael Becker.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's meeting. So typical format, introduce new people. Next, we talk about the projects we're working on. And then if we have any pre-programmed topic, we jump into that, which we don't today. So this is more of a free-for-all. So let's just jump right in. I don't see really anyone new. All the names look pretty familiar to me. So let's jump into topics. What projects are people working on? Do they have any comments, questions, anything in particular they want to discuss?
Well, we actually did announce a topic, though quite late in the week, of Tinderbox in its relation with other tools. Other tools we use with Tinderbox for work to create
Okay.
workflows.
Okay. We can certainly talk about that. And then I can pull that. I got some good stuff on that too. Other tools. I like that topic. And then another one I'd like to follow up on was Mark gave us a really nice couple weeks back review of doing creating an outline in Tinderbox. And I wanted to circle back on that because I kind of mocked up a quick demo on how to do that with actual numbering. So what Mark did was provide us a demo of creating an outline with various different types of outlining, not necessarily with numbering. And I mocked together a really simple example on how you can do numbering and then control that. So if you guys are interested, we could take a look at that as well. And that one should be pretty straightforward. So if we wanted to start with that,
Let's do it.
we can then jump into that. Okay. So let's do this. And now remember, if you recall, my projects are really about getting output, out of my Tinderbox file. So, what we're going to do here then is the objective is to look at a series of notes, and you'll see here it's basically a heading 0, which I'm calling like the title, and then a heading 1, a heading 2, a heading 3, and then from a numbering perspective, then you'll see from an outlining structure. So I'd want every one of these to be heading 1s. I'd want then the next level down to be heading 2, the next level down to being a heading 3, and then so on. So the key here is to be able to enable the outline to be dynamic. Moreover, the key is to enable the ability, for instance, like let's say I had my document shoved into a subfolder called reports. I'd want the naming to continue to be to be appropriately managed from wherever the starting document is. So does that make sense? Before I move on? Okay. Now, what Mark was showing us a couple weeks ago was how to do using action code, either in a rule or in an edict, to calculate the reference number that you'll want to be able to do for that particular note. And that works great. But when I find that I get into some really larger files, not that it's a bad thing per se, especially because I've got the wickedly cool fast Mac, I tend to like to not have action code running in the background unless I absolutely need it. And so I found a strategy for myself where I actually have the action code running in templates. So the action code is only triggered when I actually trigger a template. And then when the template's done processing, the action code stops and we're good. So that is another way of triggering action code. So if you'll see here, then, and then the other thing too is, and then I'll kind of show you what my goal here was, is sometimes, and so if you look here, I'll go to the template, the report. So you see, I've just applied my HTML template to this. And so now if I go and preview that note, you'll see I'm getting heading 1, heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then this one is a 1, 2, 3, and then a 2, 3. So you see, I'm able to kind of organize that. Now, sometimes though, I want the numbers to show. And so I created a Boolean for myself called is yes reference outline. And so what that essentially says is give me the outline. And so now when I do that, I've got my title, and then I've got my 1, 2, 3, 4, and you'll see how they all automatically construct. And the nice thing about that is I then can move the notes around, and that numbering will automatically change as I'm moving those numbers around. So that's the goal. Now, if you want me to, let me show you how I did that. So typical HTML template. So you've got your opening doc stuff, and you've got your body text, and here it's processing the children like you normally would expect. So on the parent note, I have it set its heading depth to 0 because what I want in this context is I want that first selected note to become the title. Now, there's different ways to go about doing this, but I have it selected to be a title. Now, the other reason why I do this too is in more complex templates, I have code that when I feed this in through Pandoc to a Microsoft Word document, Word will recognize these different heading numbers and render them properly. When you go to the next level, so essentially I've got this note selected, that's the title, and then all of its children then will be duly processed. And so here's the bit of code that I'm now doing it with that. So I'm essentially starting to say, okay, let's create our outline references. Let's create a string, and we'll call that string v outline reference. And then this is where the conditional comes in. If yes reference outline parent equals true, then I want the is ref outline equals true. And then else I want you to then go off and not provide the outline. So essentially what I'm doing here is, telling the tool, look at your parent. And if I've told the parent to create the outline of the note, then go ahead and start processing notes for me. Otherwise, don't process note for me. And so then I'm saying if the yes outline equals true, then what I want you to do is make the heading depth equal to the parent, and then make the outline depth equal to the sibling order, and then the outline reference order equal to the outline ref plus a period. So essentially what this does is it starts constructing the layers of the outline order, and then else go ahead and make it the parent. And the reason why I'm doing this is if I've got a note that's just the first one, I don't necessarily want the sibling orders to be presented. So then I go through and do that, and then I've got an else, and what this does is clear the outline, and then for creating the heading, the outline formatting for say like a CSS template or something of that nature, I go ahead and feed the heading number in with the value of heading depth, and then I have it pass the outline value reference that this code has created. So when you go ahead and do that, you get this. And so it's a pretty elegant way for with just a few lines of action code built into a template to be able to turn on and off outline numbering. And it works no matter where and the key thing for me is the 0 starts with the selected note, and so therefore it will work no matter where I am and no matter how deep I am into the structure of a Tinderbox file. Whatever my first note I'm selected is the title, and then everything numbers off of that. Thoughts, questions, comments, curiosities?
Very cool.
Yeah, it works really nice. It's taken me a while to kind of get down to that level of simplicity, but as they say, I apologize for this length of the letter because it took me too long to write it. So when you have time, you can actually get it simpler and simplified down.
I've started. It's not in the public site yet, but probably in the next baseline of Tinderbox, I've started to basically abstract some of these ideas, because a number of people have said, okay, I watched the video or I attended the talk, I get the concept, but I need a bit more of a bridge.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of the bridging between actually a demo like this and just saying, but what I actually want to do is I want to do it over there, and instead of using 1, 2, 3, I maybe want to use Roman numerals or something. So I'm going to try and abstract that out. So the point is, where do I put the sort of connection into the document, and then what sort of code do I need to connect it up to, or what sort of things do I need to track, and then hopefully that'll give some of the degree of choice that people will probably like when approaching this. Mark.
Right. Mr. Bernstein.
Yeah, walk me through the meaning of the variable of the attribute is yes ref outline.
So and again, it's just a naming thing. So is yes ref outline means so I use is as a Boolean for all of my attributes. So anytime I have a Boolean, I start it with is. So that way I can remember to do it. And then then we'll follow that up with either a yes or no. That will remind me which kind of direction this logic will take. And then the ref outline means I want to use a referenced outline. I mean, I didn't need the word ref. I could have just said outline. Now that I think about it, but I was doing this in a hurry because I had to get a client project out. So I just kind of hacked it together. So this is basically saying, yes, I want to have an outline. So up here, I'm saying at the parent level, I'm saying, turn on this outline. And so I say, I want to use outline numbers for all of my children. So then if I go here, I said, so if the parent, so if I'm up here, I'm obviously 0. So now if I'm this note and I'm being processed by Tinderbox, because the key thing is Tinderbox, once you've selected a note, the way the export engine works is that Tinderbox actually processes each subsequent child and descendant individually as it goes through the process. And then depending on what your template does, it will output accordingly what you want. So what I'm saying here is, if the parent of me, so like I'm this heading note 1 that's now being processed is true, then I want to set your outline reference to true. So I want me to be locally setting myself to true. If it's not else, if the outline to the parent is false, then I want to set the outline ref to false. And I should probably, or set the, okay. And then what I want you to do, if it's false, what I want you to do is clear the outline reference variable. So if you see here, I've got a, and I probably could have done this as a variable too, but I didn't, where this is where I'm parking the outline number when it gets calculated. And so that's what this is doing. It's just basically letting me say, am I going to apply an outline or not? And if it's true, then yes, I will. If it's not, then I'm zeroing out the outline. Then down here, I'm saying, okay, if my outline number is true, so in other words, that's what was set up here. So if my parent told me to give myself an outline, then the parent set me as true. So now the template's saying, if I am true, what I want to do is, if the heading depth is 0, then what I want you to do is make your outline ref number equal to the sibling order. So in other words, if we're looking down here, the sibling order in this context would be 1, 2, and 3. So that's what's happening here. And then, but if my parent is not 0, what I want is the outline ref to be the outline ref of the parent, which would namely be one of these two, right? So if my parent is, so this one will actually have a number. So this one's the only one that will ever have 0. So if my parent is not 0, then what I want to do is first start inheriting the number from my parent and then adding that down. And so if I go here, if my outline number is, so if my outline parent depth is 0, then use my sibling order to create the outline ref number. If my outline ref number is of the parent, otherwise, if it's not 0, meaning it's been assigned a number, I want the outline ref number parent plus the sibling order of me. So in this case, for example, so we know here, this is going to be 1, 2, and 3. So this one knows that its outline depth is not 0. So it's going to grab 1 from here and then add 2 for itself. And it knows that this one is not 0. So it's going to grab the 1, 2 from here and then add 1, 2, 3 for itself. And that's kind of how I built that logic. And so when I go like that, I can get this process. So, that makes sense to everybody? Took me a little while to to get it right, but it was the most elegant way I could come up with around doing it. And the other thing too is, because some of my files are getting excruciatingly large, I try not to put data into an attribute unless I can help it. So I'll either park it in a variable if it's for a minimal, if it's not going to be used for anything past the processing of the form, or I'll end up clearing it out.
How large does a file have to be before it excruciates you?
Well, some of my notes have 8,000 files and they're running 6,000 to 7,000 edicts at any given time. And I can't say it's excruciating, so I can be really impatient. So more than 6 seconds. So so I'm like, it's a massive first world problem. And then invariably, if I find that a template takes more than 4 or 5 seconds to render, it tends to be due because I did something wrong in the template, right? I created some cross-reference that the template was getting into an infinite loop. And that was just the computer was doing what I told it to do, and it was dutifully trying to do it, and I was basically killing it. So most of the time, Tinderbox will handle that for me. Sometimes it won't, but I just, part of it is just I've gotten to the habit of trying to be data minimalistic, in the process, just because it's also a good thing to do in the lores of privacy and all that, is to only use data if you need it. So does that make sense, everybody? So I'll happily share this file if you guys want. But that's how I went about solving this problem for creating an outline. And again, the great thing about it is what it does is it lets us. So for example, if I apply the HTML template to this one, you'll now see I've got reports, and then I get heading 0, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So yeah, it's fun. So unless you have any other questions, we can move to the other primary topic that we've been talking about with for this session, which was the other tools we use with Tinderbox.
Mark Anderson had a query in the chat about linking.
Yes, but I think we can take it later. It was prompted by another person turning up. So it was another variation on it. I use application X a lot. I'm used to making a link this way. Why can't I make a link this way? This is the only way I understand to make a link. And it's easy to misconstrue that as not trying, but there is a problem. We're all stuck within a starting point of view, and one of the things is how to help. I'm interested in thinking how to help ease users forward in understanding there's a much richer way you can use linking, because a lot of the current crop of PKM tools basically fall out from wikis. So if I do 2 square brackets, that's what that is the magic sauce that creates a link. If I don't do that, all bets are off. And some allow you to not use the target name, and that's kind of advanced magic. And I don't mean that to be unkind, but it's missing the point of a lot of hypertext. And I think it causes people to drive this expensive car in first gear. So I don't know. I'm interested in, if people have thoughts as to ways they've moved beyond that, if they've come from a system that had less rich linking, or just ways to make people sort of move beyond this thing. It's very difficult. I mean, part of the problem is getting people, to let go of the bar at the side of the swimming pool and actually swim away from the edge. And that's what we're fighting against. But they're saying, no, I only feel safe in this zone. This is the certainty of my life, and I don't wish to be challenged by another way. And yet the very things they're asking for would be better served by a different solution.
Exactly. So yeah, the linking one's interesting. I mean, I use linking in Tinderbox to not necessarily for a visual affordance. While I see the value in it, I don't necessarily I don't use it for that purpose. My purpose is primarily as a rail to be able to move data up and down the chain of notes, move data from one note to another note to another note, as you've seen before. Peter.
Yeah, I wanted to share 2 little techniques I came up with this week. The first problem, the general context, I decided that I didn't like the way NewWeb was handling all of its output in literate programming. And since NewWeb was written in C and it's really ugly, hacking the original program wouldn't be worth the effort. I decided to re-implement its functionality directly in Tinderbox so that we can just use it as a Tinderbox-based system and not have to fiddle with the external command line program. So while working towards that, I discovered that I needed to have the IDs of the aliases to note, whereas the aliases attribute gives paths, which worked just fine, except if you had copies aliases of the same note that we're laying at the same outline level so that they would be different instances of different outline orders, but they'd map to the exact same path. So that wasn't working for me. So I then created a new attribute, user attribute called alias IDs. And I have a generic template note, and I'm going to drop into the chat the magic code that solves the problem. It's a one-liner, which of course you can only get things like that in Tinderbox. Dropping into the chat now. So on the A note prototype that all of the notes that we care about inherit from, we have an edict. The edict will set the rule of the notes to set the alias ID, the alias IDs, which is a list attribute, to the values collected if a note's original is the ID of the note whose rule is being set by the edict, and the note is an alias, and it's not inside of an agent query. So this will cause the alias ID's user attribute to automatically self-populate itself with the note IDs of the aliases so that we can then tease out where they are in the outline view and get other information related to them. The other thing that I wanted to do was to generate both source code files from a web and also generate the tech typesetting files to produce the typeset book version. And in order to do that, I decided to come up with a system of automated export. So what we did for that problem was, let me give you the rule. First of all, I created a couple of user attributes. The first user attribute was a Boolean for tangle and a Boolean for weave. That controls whether I want to be producing source code files or typesetting files. Then I have an attribute called tangled and an attribute called woven, and that's going to hold the generated text of two different parallel templates that will be running at the same time on the actual content of the note. Then I am going to have a tangled template and a woven template user attribute that will hold the names of the notes that contain the templates for the two different parallel export systems.
So Peter, not to interrupt, yeah, I've gotten totally lost, to be honest. So what's the objective, or what problem are you trying to solve?
Okay, the objective is to have two checkbox user attributes, one for tangled, one for woven, that control which or both of two templates that get applied to the note, and to automatically output that note to disk. And I'm dropping the code for that in the chat. And this is a rule that gets applied to notes that we want to be potentially exporting. And the first thing that we'll do is it will set the content to be exported on the two templates to the exported string of the current note when applied to the corresponding template for whether we're tangling or whether we're weaving.
Okay,
Then,
and just for academic purposes, what is tangled versus woven, and why do they matter?
okay, tangled is where you strip out the documentation and produce a source code file, which could be a computer source code file, or maybe even just a general document that you're writing. Maybe you want to do a layer of commentary on top of some markdown document that you're generating. The markdown document that you're generating would be the tangled output, and the woven output would be your meta-level commentary describing how you're constructing your target file out of a bunch of different chunks of text, which could be in an arbitrary order.
And is
So
this
the idea
is this an industry standard thing, or is this pertain to a particular coding language or anything like that?
It would be coding language independent, and the idea was Donald Knuth's idea from his web system that he used for authoring his tech typesetting system and all of his subsequent papers.
So to summarize, what you're suggesting is you create two Boolean attributes. Depending on which of those Boolean attributes are checked, that will determine which template is going to be used, which will then appropriately output.
Yes, or both at the same time. And then the very last thing we do is we have a little test. If the tangled Boolean attribute is set to true, we run command with a cat dev standard in piped into the export file path attribute saying where we want the file to appear. And we pass as content on standard input the expansion of the appropriate template. And that will cause the file system to echo out the file and put into a file for you without having to go through the export menu from inside of Tinderbox, and it will automatically be kept up to date.
Right. So again, I think just for the humans listening in on this, I think the key is to summarize that you can use Boolean attributes to determine which template can be used, which would then trigger different types of code that would allow you to produce different single or different simultaneous outputs. And I think that's the key lesson, and you're providing an example on how that's done.
Right.
And again, do you have a link to this thing called Tangle or Woven? I've never heard of or seen those concepts. Do you?
If you just Google New Web, you can find the New Web programming system that I'm replicating the functionality of, only in Tinderbox in a much nicer way.
So so what
Google New Web. It's on SourceForge, and you can find the documentation all for it there.
Got it. And that's the link that I believe Mr. Bernstein posted up before.
That's it. But that's the link to their project.
So apparently New Web has some concept called Tangled and Woven.
Right.
Got it. Okay.
And it does both automatically. And in the original system by Noof, there were actually two different programs that would tangle and weave the output to produce either the programming language or the typeset documentation. And then subsequent systems merge them into a single program that's run once. And now we're just dispensing with the command line tool, bring it all into Tinderbox. And then I can do things that New Web can't do. The main motivation here was that sometimes I want to have, you can have name fragments. And the name fragments can be defined by chunks of text in multiple places in your overall outline. And normally those things just appear in the outline order. But sometimes I actually would want the source code file to alphabetize them. New Web can't do that. So by bringing it into Tinderbox, it's just a matter of telling it now, sort on name as opposed to sorting on outline order. And then it can produce my woven output to either have the source code identifiers, say, that are in a list alphabetized automatically for me, or have them appear in the order that they were introduced into the document.
Great.
And lots of times the order they're introduced into the document naturally is totally irrelevant to understanding what they're doing. You really want them to be alphabetized in the output. New Web couldn't do it. And of course, in Tinderbox, just toggle the sort attribute.
So that's one of the nice things that Tinderbox is, it allows us to transform code. And just so people can then understand, and we can move on from this then, is you've developed these kind of rules or capabilities to do that, but depending on what's been checked in the toggles, you can then export code. I use this all the time. This is a really interesting Tinderbox capability called export string. So basically you're saying export the current note with the template tangled to the attribute tangled. So essentially what you're doing is you're exporting he's essentially what he's doing, he's parking the exported string of that note to the word tangled, because then he can later pick that up. And so he's saying here then, if tangled has a value, then I want you to do is run a command line code that essentially this is the name of presumably some application you have running, a command line application you have running.
That's part of Apple's standard system package, so it's on everybody's Mac already.
And what is it supposed to do?
It concatenates standard input coming from, it concatenates whatever is appearing on standard input and pipes it. The little greater than sign is telling it to pipe it into the file path that appears after it.
Okay, so let's go. Okay, so let's just walk back through this. So there's some like standards, blah, 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 that Peter just said. Then
that's all part of the Unix layer in the Mac. Right. So that's all part of the Mac OS at the command line level.
From a Tinderbox perspective, what you're doing is you're saying, hey, Tinderbox, grab, if the value attribute has tangled has a value, run the command this, and then pass whatever that is.
Let me jump in here.
Yeah.
What cat does is copy the copy something into a file. So
Got it.
the first if is if you have something entangled, then make a file with the stuff entangled that's named, and go find the name of the new file entangled export path.
Yeah, and put it at this location on your computer.
Exactly.
Got it.
And if we have something in Weave, then we make a file whose name you will find in the attribute woven, and the name of the file is woven export path.
Right. So Peter has a very specific use case for a very specific need, but I think what we can learn from this, though, is much like I was showing you when I was creating the outlines. You can use booleans to trigger activity in your Tinderbox file. Once he's triggered that boolean, he can then set this up and then have these files actually basically produced and copied to a specific location on his computer. And then from there, he can pick up and do any number of different things. So that hopefully people listening into that can zero in on that, this being the lesson of booleans can trigger logic. This logic then can do stuff. And one of the stuffs that you can do is take files out of an attribute, process them through a command line on your computer, and have them output to your computer, which, by the way, is a really great segue to the next kind of primary conversation we wanted to have for today's discussion is what other applications do we use for and with Tinderbox? And just to pause there, and unless Peter, you have anything else to say about this?
No, this is just routing to the regular terminal, and again, the cat and all that's just part of the base Mac OS, so you don't have to install anything. It runs completely out of the box.
Right.
And you don't have to go through the Tinderbox export menu or any FileBox dialogues. They'll just automatically happen.
Right. And so as an example to that, so as you all know, I publish out of Tinderbox constantly and produce Microsoft Word documents. And that is using that same thing that Peter just walked through. That's what I do with Pandoc. So in our notes and in our files, I can run commands that would then trigger Pandoc. Pandoc will take that file that I've exported to my computer, process it, and then create a Microsoft Word document for it. So, given the other topic that we talked about, what are the other tools that we use in our knowledge management sphere to be able to get a lot of value out of Tinderbox? This is an article I wrote back in 2019, I think. August 21. And this list of tools that is, starting with Tinderbox is my core personal knowledge management tool. But then here's the list of the satellite other applications that I found to be incredibly helpful for all that I do. And the reality is this list has actually stayed pretty darn stable since 2021. So, why don't we kind of jump to that conversation? So what other tools are people using in and around Tinderbox? And, maybe we can talk about those and demonstrate some of them.
Michael,
Yes, ready.
Grammarly goes off device, right? Has to go up to the internet.
I don't know. I don't know if Grammarly is cloud-based or local-based processing.
Okay, my impression is, because I avoid it, is it does have to go off device.
It's possible. There's some of those things as a privacy wonk, I get really scared about some of those things. And then sometimes I'm like, I just got to get my job done. And as you all know, I'm such a horrific speller. This is the thing that I've found works for me.
Good enough.
And frankly, a lot of the stuff I write is not that confidential, so I'm not too worried about it. But yeah. So what other tools do you all use? Anything new or anything different from this list that we see here? Yeah, Mr. Becker. Great name, by the way.
Yeah.
No relation.
Yeah, I mean, I use Tinderbox and Devon Think on your list, but I use bookends I'm an academic.
Yeah.
So I use Tinderbox as a Zettelkasten on steroids, as I like to call it, because it can do so much more than its competitors, I think, concerning Zettelkasten. But for me, bookends is, I used Zotero before, but I find that bookends works really, really well. And I'm reading in bookends and taking my notes as note cards in bookends.
Mhm.
And then they link really, really well. So the cards that after I read, I then bring them into Tinderbox. Either I can mark a lot of note cards and then I explode them in Tinderbox and I get a lot of, every quote or whatever I bring over as different notes. So that I feel it works a lot better than Zotero worked before for me, for my workflow.
Sure. Yeah. No, bookends is great. A lot of people get a lot of value out of that for sure. It's a good tool. Mr. Anderson.
I put a link in the sidebar. There are loaded in ATVRef a number of applications, mainly because either Tinderbox has made accommodations for them or their considerations. It's cropped up enough their considerations you might want to make. One tool I know that it doesn't turn up there that I think is becoming of increasing interest to those who want to automate between apps is Hook, which is just renaming, I think, to Hookmark. So either of those names should find it interesting app, basically allowing you to make custom links between different content for different apps on your system. I was just thinking, hearing the reference to bookmarks, which I indeed myself use. And I noticed Zotero gets a lot of light because it's free and it's widely used. And I think Mendeley is also free. So for a lot of people who are at junior level studies, so they're doing first undergraduate degree, or they're doing maybe carrying on doing postgraduate work, if they haven't by that time acquired a reference manager, probably they'll be pointed towards this. Tools like bookends are wonderful, but obviously pay for, and a lot of people have reservations about paying for such niche tools until they really know they need them. But again, bookmarks like Tinderbox repays use because it's been around a very long time on the Mac platform, so interacts with the Mac platform in all sorts of wonderful ways, plays nice with Devon Think and Tinderbox and things. But it's definitely another case where, as I found over time, I used it very lightly to start with until I was doing my sort of thesis work, and then had to dig a bit deeper and was wonderfully surprised by what was there. But it's very much I think reference manager is very much a category of both and rather than either or. And indeed, some people use multiple ones. And one other aspect of Zotero that may appeal to some is if you've got to work with other people, it has. Perhaps better is probably the wrong word, but it certainly has easier support for interchange, unless, for instance, you're interchanging directly to another user of the same reference manager. So again, these are not qualitative judgments, but just useful things people might find.
Yeah, it's got a really nice cloud feature to be able to create bookmarks with other people and do projects together. But yeah, again, there's here nor there when it comes to that. What is this language tool that someone posted up?
It's basically a Grammarly equivalent.
Okay.
And at one point it would run completely locally. I don't know. I just popped onto their website now and it looks like they might be shifting into some sort of a pay-per usage model to go more like Grammarly. But at least at one point it would run completely local on your machine.
Okay. Very cool. And
I got confused, Mark Anderson. Was there a reference to bookmarks or bookends?
Sorry, Bookends, which is made by Sunny Software, and John. It's another small shop where the developer never seems to sleep. I'm always amazed at how quickly I get a reply. But I think it's one of these things that again may look at first sight. The classic thing is people will often look at something like that and think it doesn't look particularly up to date. It doesn't look like the the sparkly new iOS app I saw, but it's been around a very, very long time, and has accommodations for people who've had to do gnarly things with references for a long time. And I was very surprised when I was studying recently how little effort was given to explaining reference managers. The assumption always was that people understood, but certainly if you only ever publish in one field, therefore use one format, actually reference management is a significantly smaller problem than if you're jumping between formats and genres and publishers and things, where you need something that helps you with a quite complicated mapping between the sort of metadata you have about a reference and how you need to format it for somebody who won't accept it unless you format it in a style that they're not particularly well intentioned about explaining to you. And a constant embarrassment in the whole publishing sector is how few format owners have taken any attempt to move past the paper generation. It's almost as if the web had never happened.
Yeah.
I'm shocked. I'm shocked.
Well, indeed.
Yeah, and just kind of show you the benefits too of how, I'll give you an example. And I've shown this before, but just to kind of show people why we do these different methodologies. So here, for instance, I've been doing a lot of my social media posts where I'll craft my social media posts in Tinderbox, and I do that with all my articles as well. Like here's an article I wrote yesterday. Actually, you all might not know about this, but the BBC just launched something really cool called the BBC Data Pod, which actually let you start taking control of your media consumption. And so this is an example of an article I've posted and I've put up here. But what I wanted to show you was in this example here, let's say I want to find one where I actually talk a little bit more. So again, this would work with bookends if bookends could actually export a BibTeX file. So one of the other things I'll use is actually a BibTeX file, and I know bookends does. So there's a couple mechanics that are happening here in this process. So coming out of Zotero or bookends, you publish a BibTeX file, which is essentially just a text file sitting on your computer. And I'll show you an example of that just so we can all see what that looks like. And BibTeX is a standard format. And I'll give you an example what one looks like.
Standard to who?
Well, it's the standard. I don't know. I'm not going to guess.
It's that sort of standard. It's not a. It's a BibTeX. It came out of LaTeX. So
Right.
It's basically written to use with LaTeX,
Yeah,
which
so
is both its strength and its weakness.
right.
And BibTeX has never really moved on. It's another problematic thing. It's another linchpin format that sits there that's never really advanced beyond its original use.
So
I think partly because some of the core LaTeX users seemingly are very militant about they're not interested in digital text.
Yeah.
They're very wedded to the printed page.
Right.
I'm not sure quite why, but it crops up a lot in that if you go and interact with people who do LaTeX and you ask difficult questions, they'll say to you, there is no need for this, go print it out.
Yeah, yeah. So this is what a BibTeX file basically looks like, and essentially what happens is either out of and again, I don't know bookends, so I can't tell you exactly what it is, but out of Zotero, when I export my BibTeX file, this is what it is. And essentially every entry in my BibTeX file, and I think there's 40,000 lines here, says here's the anchor tag for that particular report, and then here's the metadata related to each of those individual reports. So that's one piece. So I've got Zotero. Zotero then in the behind the scenes is constantly updating every couple hours, updates this BibTeX file. And then what ends up happening is when I'm doing my writing, I can come in and simply just put in the anchor tag for the stop sharing screen real quick. Got something going on in the background. Come on. Reopen this. Sorry, I got to reopen my file here. Okay, then so if you look at the pieces then, so what I've got going on here is I'm just doing my right. Come on, why are you hanging up? I am having a existential crisis with my thing here. All right, there we go. Okay. So let me go find that file again. Here you go. Yeah. So here's an example. So all I then need to do is put the anchor tag. that I have in my Zotero file. So here's an example of like my Zotero file. So every one of my Zotero entries gets a citation key. That's this right here, for example. And so what I can then put that citation key at such and such, and then I'm able to process that file. Then when I go ahead here and render the file, what this is now doing is I'm now asking Tinderbox to process this file not through basically through Pandoc in the background. And when it does that, it goes through, does all the processing, and then will automatically insert citations and then give me that citation. And if I'm dealing with a file that has multiple, let me give an example where this got multiple ones. Come on, it's funny when you're okay. Here's one with multiple ones. So here's no, gotta find one with multiple entries. Yeah, so here's one with 2 different citations, and let me find one that has multiple. Okay, here's one with multiple citations. So I'm saying Google 5 years ago, after it was caught, is fined $31 million tracking people. And so here are the 2 articles. Here's how they're referenced. And then what I wanted to show you down here too is this is the other kind of cool thing you can do with Tinderbox is I've actually run a script where when I'm tagging my item, so here are the terms: fine, harm, location, privacy, regulation, tracking, and the entities that are associated with this article, associated post in Google. What I'm asking Tinderbox to do, just to make it life a little easier for me, as they said, hey, Tinderbox, what I want you to do in the background, and I'll go ahead and show you this. What I want you to do in the background is I want you to call, oh yeah, I'm not doing it again. I'm not doing it in the template. So if I go down to my post template, look here. So if I go to my post template, when I'm running this, I'm saying, hey, Tinderbox, I want you to call the if yes is hashtag, call my include hashtags function. And then if you go down to my include hashtags function, which is here, that what that's doing is it's basically taking all of the terms from the hashtags or the terms and turning them into social media posts and hashtags. And if they're related to a company, it's giving me an anchor tag. So that way, when I go do my posts, I'll go ahead and grab one like this. I want to find one with multiple ones. Yeah, like this one's got multiple. I then essentially can go ahead here and now copy this, paste this up into LinkedIn, and my social media post already has all of its hashtags. So that's another thing that would that just makes this really easy to be able to engage and interact with something of this nature. The other nice thing about this, and this is what Mark Anderson was just talking about, in this context, when I'm doing my professional work, I use Chicago style styling with numbered footnotes. But because Tinderbox can be really smart with these kinds of things, in partnership with tools like Pandoc, if I ask it to then process the citations not with Chicago styling but with APA styling, then what I get is it actually inserts the APA style automatically of the citation. So I'm easily able to swap in between doing academic work and industry work, all from the same source files. So the combination there is Zotero, Pandoc, an exported BibTeX file, and Tinderbox, and you basically get to do that.
So the cleverness you're referring to there, sorry, and I see a hand up, just quickly interject. The cleverness I think you're referring to there is the fact that if you have effectively a bit of boilerplate, some code set up that has the style sheet or the necessary styling information for a certain type of format, but just by swapping out the reference to the note in your export template, then you get a magical transformation in terms of what's fed into the Pandoc, and therefore the finished format you see.
Correct. And to give you an example, so this is apa.csl. So what Pandoc does, what the Pandoc command line does, much like what Peter was talking about here, let me give you an example of the command doc let me find a quick one here. Yeah. I want to give you a quick example of a Pandoc command line. I just got to find it here. Yeah, here's an example of a Pandoc command line, right? So it's basically saying, go grab the Pandoc app and then process this file. And then each of these little double dashes are flags telling Pandoc what to do. And essentially, if you add this bibliography flag in the Pandoc command line, you're asking Pandoc, go to this file on the hard drive and grab the appropriate .csl file. And a CSL file is basically this. And so if I open this up, you'll see it. I'll open one up in BB Edit so you guys can see it. This is what a CSL file does. And essentially, this has been written by some glorious human being out on GitHub. Brenton Weineck, who basically wrote the CLS file that says, if you're doing APA and you have Pandoc call the CSL file, your reports and your journal articles and your templates will be formatted in this way. Similarly, there are glorious, wonderful human beings out there in the world that have written ones for MLA and other ones for Chicago. And so that's the other piece to this trick, is essentially what you do is you've got your BibTeX file, which is pulling the information for the citation. You've got Pandoc, and then Pandoc is going to look to then, how do you want me to take that information out of the BibTeX file and format it? And it's going to use the CLS file or a CSL file as the template for telling it how to actually format the published information. And you can find these CSL files out in Reddit and GitHub and all that. There's some glorious people that have pre-done that, so I could never write it myself, but that's how you do that. We can kind of circle back to this, but Tom's been patiently waiting with his hand up, so let's let Tom.
So one of the applications I use a lot, but is not directly tied to Tinderbox, is Readwise, because it collects all sorts of highlights from all sorts of things, from Instapaper, Kindle, a lot of other things, into one place where I can then select the ones I want, export it as Markdown, and then they go into Tinderbox or other places. The thing I like a lot about it is, and it wasn't until within the last year I learned about this, maybe they didn't have it, is if you have a hard copy that is now digital form, like old books, you can use your camera and you take a picture of the little section of the page and it will automatically OCR it. You select that part you want and it will put it inside the relevant book.
Yeah, that's really important. It's really important. I'm glad you brought that up, because if you go back to, I think a month ago or so, we were talking about our use of exporting out highlighted notes out of Skim.
Yeah.
Then using Tinderbox to then color code those highlighted notes.
Right.
Readwise is another really great tool for that. And so you can use all, if for those that are listening, go backward about a month and you'll find our Skim discussion, and with very minor tweaks of the code we provided in those examples, you could be automatically processing Readwise exports just as easily. Yeah.
The thing about Readwise I like is the fact that I can digitize the content in a very out of print book.
Yep.
I don't know if Skim can do that.
Well, no, it can't. No, so I'm not. No, Skim is just it's a really nice open source PDF reader to manage highlights and all that. But Readwise. What I like about Readwise is it also does it for Kindle books.
Yeah,
so you can actually import Kindle highlights.
Well, it does, and it doesn't take PDFs of the pictures. It just takes a temporary picture, and then you select the text you want it to collect.
Yeah.
And then you can put notes on it, and tag it. If you can there's a section for adding a note to that selection. So if you want to tag it with something that will be picked up later, when you process the Markdown file, you can do that.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I've got Mr. Peter, go ahead, and I'll show you guys something else I think is kind of cool.
Okay, I wanted to mention Techifier, which used to be called TechPad, and it can automatically run all the different apps in the Tech suite and install them if you don't have a local install ahead of time, to be able to handle the actual typesetting and sequencing of the multiple passes that you sometimes have to do with your typesetting if you're building complicated indexes and cross-references. That's a really nice and useful tool. And of course, also, if it's running in the background and you're using Tinderbox to generate text source, it will automatically update the text source and turn it into the final typeset PDF on the fly as changes are being made to the source documents. So you can just like have a split screen with one half Tinderbox, one half Techifier showing your final output as you're working on it. Also wanted to mention Frode Hagelin's author and reader apps. Mark Anderson can talk about that a little bit, maybe. Those are really nice because when you're copying from them, they'll automatically pick up citation information and move it between documents, and they can produce visual meta.
Nice. Nice. So, and what do we call that app again?
Author and reader, and you can find both of them in the App Store.
No, I missed Techifier. What? I'm sorry.
Techifier. Yeah, it used to be TechPad, and now it's TEXIFER. They just renamed it. Everyone's renaming their apps now for some reason. It's like the latest rage. Let's take whatever's been around for a few years and slap a new name on top of it.
Right. And then you listed, and then you just said two other things too, real quick. What was it?
Yes, author and reader. And there's a third companion app called Liquid that can take highlight selections and jump out and pull in reference material from the web to return it for you.
Got it. So maybe
Yeah.
you can put links for that in the chat.
I was trying to find a link for the unfortunate thing about calling apps with obvious names like author and
like
reader
author,
is
exactly.
they're just incredibly hard to find. It's not so, to my mind, it's not as clever as it appears at first sight. The interesting thing that my colleague from Southampton University, Fred Hageland, has done is he was lucky enough to meet Doug Engelbart some while back and spent a lot of time talking with Doug. And so a number of his ideas about how you will find in author. So for instance, it's very easy to collapse your document with a pinch if you're on a trackpad or, you know, with a similar, I can't remember which exact keystroke it is. So you can collapse your document up and down to see different headline levels, or very quick finds of stuff. So there's an awful lot of interesting stuff he's doing there. I would say it's very, very much fitted to the author's style of writing, or sorry, the software creator's style of writing, which may take a while to wrap your head around. I still think it's worth taking a look. The easiest way is to just find them on the App Store.
Yeah, and if you can drop links though, that would be good, because again, author searching.
Yeah, I'll try and find them.
Okay, I think I got it.
Yeah. So author is the authoring tool, and it will produce PDFs, and it puts extra metadata in there that gives you additional affordances in the reader in terms of the navigation around the document. And one of the things he's through his involvement in the small forum called Future of Text, of both of which Peter and myself are a part, has been looking at ways to do sort of meaningful citation, I guess is the way. I mean, one of the issues is that you know, just as there are people who use Vim and people who use Emacs, there are people who draw on their books and there are people who do not draw on their books. Yeah. And so notions like highlighting just don't travel across the piece, or they have very different meanings to different people, yet we all need to reference. And one of the things that those tools have brought in was trialed in ACM Hypertext last year, and I'm not sure if it was used this year, is a thing called Visual Meta, which looks clunky at first sight. Those of you who recognize what BibTeX is will see it looks a bit like BibTeX. But the basic concept is saying, well, actually, if the metadata is visible within the document, you don't have to print it. And it's an early stage for this thing, but if the metadata is there, a tool that can read it can then go and dereference that and do a lot more with it. So in other words, the reader agent that you have for something like a PDF can potentially be giving you a much richer picture. And for instance, and one of the aspirations is, for instance, if that document's on your system, then if that document's referenced without actually having to go through something like your reference manager, it will open that document for you. I think there are a few more hoops to get through to make that happen, but it's interesting. Yeah. And as the group has also been looking at work, not entertainment in VR and AR, it's also quite interesting because as everything has to be constructed in a virtual environment, it gives you pause for thought as what extra metadata you might pass along, so a document can be more useful to you. So for instance, you might have a document so you can pull it apart into its constituents articles, or you might be able to drill right through into the data set behind it. I know that's done in things like Jupyter, and PyDocs and things like that. So it's not a new notion, but it is quite new from the notion of a text-based document rather than a data-based document, which is where things like PyDocs come from. This is where I want to write a document, but really I'm trying to write code and do code. Whereas the idea of no, I've got something that actually is a textual, is text, or it might be you might be writing a report for yourself or for a body you belong to, or for a client or something, and actually for them to being able to drill right through it quite deeply into the data behind it, blasting through this whole notion of this sort of ghastly layer of dashboards that we have now. Is again quite entertaining. So I recommend the tools to take a look at just for that. Whether you like or want to use them is a different matter, but they're quite interesting for some of the notions, and it's good to see people keeping Doug's work alive. End of plug.
All right, a couple other comments we see here. I saw Text Sniper, and if those that don't use Text Sniper, I highly recommend it. It's awesome. I mean, so like Snagit has Text Sniper as well, or a function called grab in it. So Snagit is basically you can take a picture and then apply its grab feature to be able to grab text. But here's an example of a picture, and so I've got a hotkey set up to be able to use Text Sniper. So when I copy over this image, Text Sniper has automatically copied all of the words to the clipboard. And if I hit paste, there you go. So if you need to grab any text out of a video or an image or anything of that nature very quickly, Text Sniper just rocks. I mean, it's really, really good. It's also a nice way of like quickly grabbing a bunch of emails out of an email client and stuff like that if it's been PDF'd or something. So that's a nice utility. The other one that we really haven't talked about yet, which is Text Expander. So for example, you might have noticed in the past where I've typed lorem and I have it automatically populate text in for content. But one of the ways I use Text Expander is this. So we talked earlier, let's say I was writing a story about data and I didn't actually want to, let's say I want to, for the sake of this argument now, I'm going to move this article here. And so like, let's say I'm writing a story about data and I go like this. Here. All right, so I've got 3 paragraphs of text. Super cool. Now, if I go ahead and apply my my template to this this note, let me go ahead here. Come on. There you go. So you'll see now here, Tinderbox is dutifully processing the note, giving me the text, and then taking the image and sticking the image at the end of the note, because that's exactly what I'm telling it to do. But let's say I actually wanted the image to be right here in my document as opposed to somewhere else. Well, then what I can do is I'm going to grab the name of this file. And because I've now copied this name, I'm putting the name on the clipboard. I'm now going to my Text Expander, and I'm going to say now include. And so what I've done is I've had Text Expander put in the text that I want there. And now I'm going to have to go here and say smart quotes. So turn off my smart quotes so I can manipulate that text a little bit. And in this context, I don't want to create a bullet for text. So I'm just going to delete that. I'm going to paste this in here. And I'm going to change this to T Media. So now what I'm doing is I'm telling Tinderbox, hey, go include the note, fig the story of data, and apply the template T Media to it when you're rendering the document. So then I go like that. So now that image is now dutifully inserted into the middle of the document, but you'll see it's still here at the end. So then what I do here is, and I can go ahead and reset this notes. Let me give this note the right prototype. I want to give it the prototype of my P page. And so now I can say, and then I've got a bunch of Booleans. Remember earlier we were talking with Peter about Booleans? So I've got a bunch of Booleans that says show the title, show the text, don't show its children. So in this case, I'm going to uncheck the child note. So when I do that, I now get the paragraph, the text, the paragraph, and the children's not shown. So now I have this really cool way to be able to manipulate and manage how my documents are being created. And Text Expander just makes it really easy for me to not have to remember what to type and what not to type. I just say I want to include here, and then I can do that. So that's another Text Expander is a really nice companion utility. Hopefully that was of interest to some people.
Very nice.
Peter, do you remember a while back we were trying to play with the natural language processing engine? Do you remember that? That I think it was GPL. Because and maybe Mark Bernstein could help us with this. I got to find it. There was one that I'm wanting to learn how to use, and I've been unsuccessful in doing it. Oh, that's it. I think this is it. Let me find it. I think this is it. Yeah. Yeah. So maybe Mark, this could be for a future discussion. I've been wanting to figure out how to use the OpenA API. So what this is under the GPL language, and essentially what this API allows you to do is through the command line, you could publish text into the OpenAI API, and then the AI will actually take that text and create versions, like write whole stories for you. So you could feed, here are 10 keywords that you could feed into the OpenAI API, and it would spit back an article for you.
So a prompt like "do my homework" and
Yes.
you get your homework back.
That's exactly it. So it's a big marketing thing where they're asking tools like OpenAI API to write your blog articles for you or write your customer reviews for products. And so I've been trying to play with this to figure out how to make it work, but that could be something else to really play with.
It'd be interesting to see where it does real customer reviews, where they don't mention your tool at all, but complain mainly that it doesn't have something that some other tool has, which seems to be the way a lot of us write a review.
Yeah, so let's see if I can give you a demo of it. Well, so I'm going to try to log in here if someone else can come up with an idea. So what other tools do you use? So we've given quite a few examples. What's this Caply? What does that do? Oh, it's another version of Text Expander.
It's a documentation viewer that can also open documentation on a connected iPad, but it really has an elegant text expansion utility where it'll actually like pop up a little input field to be adding something when it's in the process of making an expansion. And I think it has the nicest user interface of any text expander I've seen yet. So even though that's just like a secondary function, the primary purpose of the app is viewing documentation, it turns out that it's even more useful as a text expander than it is in its primary official purpose.
Got it. So here's an example of Open API. I got myself logged in. So for example, if you feed it, create a list of 8 questions for my interview on science fiction author. So let's say, again, let's say data analyst. Okay, and spell it right. Okay, we'll go like that. So that's the question we're going to feed the OpenAI engine. And if we hit submit, you reached your usage limit. Oh, it wants to have charged me now. I played with it too much. So the idea is, give you an example, we'll go backwards. What it does then is it would spit out questions for you. And if you look at the OpenAI engine, there's a whole bunch of different templates, Q&A, grammar correction, write my article. Basically, it's do my homework for me. Have the AI help me do my homework. But I thought that would be really cool to be able to have Tinderbox playing with that and interacting back and forth on that.
The interesting aspect of a lot of those, and there are of course all the clever DALL-E and the image ones around at the moment. The bit that's less well written up is at what point you transition from being able to just try something to actually paying for it, and I think they're not cheap either.
No,
Which I totally understand, because obviously someone's got to pay for all the work that went into it. So in other words, the number of people who can actually use this, because at the end of the day you pay for it, versus the number of people who are currently being told you should try this, I suspect there's a disconnect.
exactly. All right, what else do we have? No, yes, what is Dash?
That was the thing that Peter just
just
mentioned.
Okay, got it. All right.
Well, I have sort of an out of left field question. Is there a Unicode symbol to represent sorting something? Or a LaTeX command that can give you a glyph to represent sorting?
Sorting in what way? The
Automatically
fact that something
alphabetizing
is
something.
sorted.
Yeah, to indicate that you want something to be sorted,
Oh,
or an alphabetization symbol, or some sort of a glyph to represent that.
well, if some field like math or graph theory or something that will possibly have that as a symbol, and then likely there will be a Unicode symbol for it in a small number of course, in a small number of fonts. But I imagine that will be your path to finding that. You're muted, Mark.
Google tells me that this is the purpose of the Unicode up arrow, down arrow glyph.
Okay,
Is to
good.
say that this means sorting.
Okay, very good. That solves my problem. Also, I noticed, looking at Mark's wonderful new documentation that he's been working on, that aliases have their own independent set of basic links apart from their originals. And I was wondering if anyone found interesting uses of that functionality yet.
I know the guy who suggested this feature, which was prepared to implement, and he's here.
Okay, so I'll stick my head above. Yes, yeah, me. It's that man again. So this arose, and in fact, because there's a sort of dissonance here in that if you want to export to HTML, and let's say you've got an agent, and what you want to do, this arose because, in fact, originally what I did was when I made the listings for ATBRef of, say, all the attributes, I then said, right, well, here's a list of all the string attributes. And I got the agent to export the same note, to separately as an alias. The problem then comes is when the link go, where links to and from that go, and often you want them to go back to the original note. Well, sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. Sometimes you actually want to link to the alias because you want to read that copy of that text in a different place within the overall corpus. And it's difficult because it sits sort of orthogonal to another use that people would like, which is you have, if I'm an agent, I don't really care. I just want to get back to I want this to link, back to the things it links to. And it's difficult because in the HTML context, you're going from, in a sense, the fluid hypertext inside the document to a set of static documents outside, where each alias actually has a discrete file. So yes, I'm entirely responsible, but I was very interested in HTML export at the time. And perhaps my future self looking back might not have pushed so hard on that, and accepted that as a limitation because of some of the other things it cuts off. But it is useful to be able to do. I used to link from aliases, or rather two aliases, a bit more than I do now in my big document. But then I found it bit me in another way, because over time, and the document's 15 years old, there's a lot of refactoring goes on. And in fact, for the next baseline, I've done a significant one because I've stopped building off the old structure of a document someone actually happened to give me literally in 2004. And I just expanded it without too much thought. And then I didn't want to change it because all the static URLs broke. And then I realized actually what's happened is that topics change. What classically will happen with a tool like Tinderbox is there will be something like an attribute will be added because it controls a certain feature. That feature then escapes the original small context in which it lived and becomes a bigger feature. So the description needs to move from the attribute note to a note on its own because it now applies to a number of things. Oh, and lo and behold, there are 3 or 4 more attributes because as this feature got richer. And so this is natural progression. But when you're trying to write documentation and think of the reader, I mean, if you're just writing for yourself, it doesn't matter. But if you're trying to write for someone who hopefully has some understanding if they follow the right links, the link triage gets incredibly complicated. And it's almost easier to not link to aliases for that matter.
And also too, aliases disappear. So if you've linked to it and it's structurally, you're dependent on that. If you somehow deleted the agent or, delete the alias, then that can all havoc can ensue from that too.
On the other hand, suppose that you want to talk about the same function, let's say addition, in 2 completely different contexts. You want to be sure that the function is documented the same way in both contexts, but it's part of 2 different sections. So your link to the enclosing section or the beginning of the chapter is naturally a different link.
Right. Then aliases are awesome.
Yeah, because what I was thinking was possibly using that functionality to represent parameterizing fragment expansions, so that I could have an alias to the fragment definition and then have a type parameter1 link coming out of one of the aliases pointing to a node that was going to represent one parameter, and a parameter2 link coming out to another one. And then if I could programmatically go in and access the targets of those links off of the alias, I'd be able to pull in my parameters that way through the linking affordance. The other thing I was thinking about was it'd be nice if I could have a top level note to automatically generate a hyperbolic view of all of the connections in my document, even though the links would be appearing at different levels in the outline hierarchy. And I was wondering if anyone
the hyperbolic view doesn't pay any attention to the hierarchy.
so that would just automatically work now.
Yeah, that's the way that's the way it works.
Very good. Because I want to have, basically one visualization of all of the connections within the document, even though, some are a level 3 levels down and others are at a level way higher. So very, very good.
But going back to
Okay,
the alias comment, by the way, another way around, I don't want to say around it, but another way you could do is use include. And you could run that include function I showed you earlier. So you could say include this note in this place, and the template you apply is simply the text of that note. So that way, to Mark's point, if you wanted to include some boilerplate from some other note in the header matter of other notes, I found the use of include to be really effective for that, because that way you don't have a bunch of aliases. It's one note, that content is in one place, and you're just linking to it with the include method.
Oh, and we could use a link action to automatically paste in the include command by drawing a link out from the original to the target. And then break the link afterwards.
If that game is for help work for you, yeah. So, Mr. Becker.
All right, I just typed that. I mean, I have a bit of another issue. So if you want to finish this one off first,
You're
okay.
good.
So basically, what I'm doing, I'm using Tinderbox as helping me to think. So bookends and DevonThink and others are for collection and storing and stuff. But then I'm writing a lot as an academic, and I'm forced through colleagues' use of MS Word and stuff to use that standard, and I've tried to use Scrivener for longer documents. But when I've done my thinking in Tinderbox, when I write, it's all sort of manual. I take my thoughts and then I just type them, in my word processor. So it seems like Michael, your use of Tinderbox, it seems like you're actually writing a lot in Tinderbox and then using Pandoc and others to sort of bring the text out. But is there anybody who has found like for longer texts, find a way to integrate to get stuff out of Tinderbox? I know that Scrivener, they're supposed to work there. I haven't really managed. The stuff I get out of Tinderbox is just an outline that is rudimentary compared to the real outline I have in Tinderbox and so on. But is there any other word processor and stuff that you use that facilitates getting text out of Tinderbox more automatically than moving text, cut, paste version? Although cut and paste works, I mean, it's works for me, but it's just perhaps I can save some time by yeah. So if you have any ideas,
I don't think I understand. Sorry.
Right. So I do my writing for the publications I publish free from, I mean, I do that directly in different word processes. So Tinderbox, I'm collecting and I'm writing my thoughts, I make the connections and so on. But when I'm getting that text, I mark notes and then I copy and then I paste into the word processes I use. That's a manual step. So I'm thinking, is there any other way of getting?
Yeah. I mean, so I use Tinderbox to, I publish all of my documents. I can publish 100-page documents out of Tinderbox into Word. Do it constantly all the time. And the way I've set up my templates, it actually is quite elegant in that for example, the note is a task, it actually gives me task tables versus just a list of individual notes, or it gives me, represents the data in the way I want it to represent in the output.
So you're writing in the outline view, for instance, or in map view to do your thinking, and then you're sorting in outline view, and how do you get that to the Word document?
Well, that's the magic of Pandoc. So what I do is I push the file to an HTML file, and then I run another command from Tinderbox that says go to the HTML file that I just put on the computer and convert that HTML file to a Word document.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm completely. This is.
I mean,
it seems to be limitless opportunities, but I just didn't know that it was even possible.
Yeah. So
well, Michael's done a number of videos on that, which he's sort of put links up to in the forum, and that's the most elegant sort of soup to nuts, basically where you press a button and you do the structure in Tinderbox. So it's things like instead of embedding images into the document, you have a note that acts as a proxy for the image, so that when you're constructing your document, you say, here, I want you to insert information from this note, which actually says, go find this file, go and build a link to this image on the thing. It's funny. I mean, I, like many, have been through all sorts of web processors, and they all have their foibles. Part of the problem is finding a writing environment, a writing tool that you feel comfortable with, and that may vary. Indeed, by what you're writing, it might be you're doing some personal writing versus report writing for somebody else, and you might find a different tool suits. Another way that's short of the total automation that Michael's given us examples of, is to think about what the writing tool you'll use will consume. So, for instance, if it can deal with, I don't know, a comma separated variable table, but it knows what to do with it and then can treat that. That's a sort of less automated way, but might help you to move segments of information that you've created in Tinderbox into your writing environment, because in fact you want to do the final polish there. You're not trying to write the long form document totally in Tinderbox for whatever reason, but you want to get sections of text. So and don't overlook the fact that you don't necessarily even need to export a file. So what you can use is, if you make a template and you export it, and then you look at the little tabs that you may need to reveal via the window menu, but or is it the view menu for text preview and export. The export folder will show you literally in a code view originally designed for hypertext, but you might be putting some XML and you might be putting some JavaScript, whatever. You can then copy that, for instance, to say paste that into something else that you're using that understands that. So I think I turn the question round, and in doing that, if I've got a tool that I like for doing a particular task, what sort of information can it consume? And then Tinderbox will probably let you make that. And I see someone sharing Mark's sharing the screen.
Right, thanks.
I just thought before we wrapped up that I'd show my meeting notes from the last 45 minutes or so. But on the subject we're discussing, the current Tinderbox does have an export section of the document that is a container and its descendants to doc format, which is Word format, and that's often pretty satisfactory. There's also a bunch of stuff in the upcoming Tinderbox that will make all of this much easier and more natural. So it's not that hard, and it's going to get easier.
Yeah. And before we jump off, maybe I can show this to Per just so we can see the output. Mind if I steal the screen back here? So here's an example of, so I showed you earlier I had different documents. So what I've done, and this is a really simple one, but there's an article that I have here, and then I've got some images underneath it. And if I want to create a draft of this article, I've got a script running, and I'll show you the script will pop over here. So basically I run a stamp. Where are my stamps? So I have a stamp called create draft self. And so what this stamp basically does is creates a draft of itself. And so if I go here then, and I show you that, and the reason why I do this, and this is really important for you, Per, because if you're an academic work, as noted earlier in today's discussion, when Tinderbox processes a file, it will process each individual file, and then Pandoc will run through it and add references to every file. So what you end up doing is you get reference sections at the end of every individual in one of your files. And so to overcome that, what I did is I invented this process I call drafts. So I first have Tinderbox go interrogate all of the files and create a draft of the file for me. So now I have a draft of that particular document and all of its output, and the references get stuck at the bottom as opposed to scattered throughout the doc. And what Mark Anderson was talking about earlier, you could just go here, hit copy on the export, and then paste that into any tool you wanted to, if you wanted to. And I do that all the time for my teaching, for my learning management stuff, is I will create all of my announcements in Tinderbox, and then I'll pop over to the LMS system and then paste the HTML into the LMS system. So that way I'm managing all of my announcements. So I manage all of my courseware out of Tinderbox. So then once you have this, okay, I'm now ready to export. So then I go here and I hit export.
You are going to have a productive day at work.
Okay, and then I have Tinderbox actually give me attributions. So I have 50 attributions that it will randomly give me as I go through my work to tell me how awesome I am. So I find that kind of fun. And then here, I'll show you here. If I now go to this output folder, and again, I don't have to export the HTML file, but that's kind of a legacy from the learning process, so I just leave it there. But you'll see here's the HTML file that just got exported, and then here's the Pandoc file that just got created. And there you go. Perfectly formatted file exported out of Word. And this is good. This is as good for a two-page document to a 150-page document. It's fully tested. And how that works, and going back to what we talked about with Peter earlier, and I'll just show you what the stamp looks like. Export, where's the export stamp? This one. So I'll just kind of briefly walk you through this. So essentially what it's basically doing is just create a bunch of variables, set a handful of flags. I have a number of variables on how I construct the command line for Pandoc, but that's basically letting me dynamically configure what CSL file I want it to be using, which directory I want it to go to, do I want a bibliography in or not? And then here's examples of the run command. So it's basically saying copy the text, then paste that, create a file for me, then paste that text into that file you just created for me, and then run the conversion command. And the conversion command is this Pandoc command up here. So it then basically asks Tinderbox to run the Pandoc command, and then that outputs a file. And then when it's done, it runs the affirmations for me to tell me how. So it randomly picks from 50 different voices on the Mac and about 50 different affirmations that I've created just for fun.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. We have come to the end of yet another Tinderbox meetup. Next weekend is Black Friday, etc., and probably a difficult weekend for lots of us. So I suggest that we skip ahead right to the weekend of December 3rd or 4th, at which time we, with any luck at all, can have What's New with Tinderbox 9.5.
Awesome.
So, Mark, do you want to keep because these meetings are always on a Saturday, except when they're on a Sunday, if we're going for the weekend of the 3rd, 4th, should we keep the order and go for a Sunday rather than a Saturday meetup?
I think, okay. So we will keep even odd.
Yeah. Yeah, please do. Otherwise that messes up everyone's calendar.
Very good. No, there's not going to be a 9.4. We're going to skip right ahead to 9.5.
Awesome.
Great. So see you in 2 weeks. Thanks for coming.
Bye, everybody.